My name is Blake Pace. I grew up in upstate New York, and because of that, I really grew up a teamless college football fan. You know, my family had professional football teams that they rooted for. My dad was a Giants fan. We're diehard Yankees fans. I adopted the Knicks when Carmelo Anthony got traded there. In the world of college athletics, in upstate New York, you just have Syracuse University. And Syracuse is great, really fun, basketball program growing up in. But in the world of football, it was, hey, here's one really good year and seven really bad ones. And then, hey, a new head coach did great in his first year, and then he fell apart. It was hard to latch on to college football as a kid growing up because there just wasn't that conference that made it feel special. I live down here in Nashville now. You're in an SEC town. It's Vandy, but you're in SEC country. You've got the likes of Tennessee football fans and Alabama fans that live here. You can feel college football in this environment. In upstate New York, where it's Syracuse and you've got Buffalo and the MAC, it doesn't really feel like college football lives up there. So I grew up without college football. Then I attended the great University of James Madison. Go Dukes. At the time, they were still an FCS program, a really good one. Two-time national champion myself. Got to cover the football team for a couple years there as a member of the Breeze, JMU's student-run publication. And now I live in a town that holds Vanderbilt. So as you can see, picking up the dots, Syracuse, JMU, Vandy, it's hard to really latch on to something that feels meaningful in the world of college football. I will always root for JMU. We're in the Sun Belt. I understand that in the world of college football today, G5 teams don't really do too much outside of maybe that last final playoff berth. Still want them to win, still will root for them every week, but it's not like I have an SEC team, or I have a Big Ten team. Syracuse, sure, I want them to do good as well too, but even if you're a middle-of-the-pack ACC team, you're probably one of the worst teams in the Big Ten or the SEC. So because of that, I think the biggest point I want with this show is that I don't want to hear any bias talk. I don't want to hear, SEC bias. He just talks about the SEC every episode. Or, he's Big Ten bias because he says that Ohio State and Michigan won the last two national champions and thinks Penn State is going to do it again this year, which, might be true. We'll find out. I won't predict that until a few more weeks, but I don't want to hear any bias talk because I am just a lover of the sport and the sport itself. I do not have this backup of growing up a Bama fan or growing up, in the world of Big Ten football. I am just a fan of the sport. Now, because of that, I do gravitate toward coaches more than anything. Gravitating toward players in college is tough because you maybe get them for a couple years and then they're gone as well too. So I gravitate more to coaches that I really love. I do hope to find my team through doing this show, and maybe there's just a coach that really clings on to me, and I feel so impassioned to adopt a big-time football program as my own. I'm not there yet. I do some writing for Texas A&M football. That's where you can find a lot of my work at the Gig'em Gazette. I probably should have said that earlier, but I'm saying it now. So if you want to find any of my writing, you can head over there. It's a fan-sided page. We'll be doing Texas A&M football all season. But because of that, I kind of, like I said, lean toward coaches. So let me just get a few of my coaches out there first so you know where I lean. Team-wise, I might have a soft spot for. Dan Lanning, favorite coach in the sport. Big year coming up for him at Oregon. Replacing Bo Nix, Dylan Gabriel, now Dante Moore in there. Not a lot of chatter with Oregon. We'll talk about them in the next coming weeks, but it feels pretty quiet up in Eugene, despite them being one of the best teams in the sport. I'm a big Kalen DeBoer guy. We'll talk about Kalen DeBoer on Wednesday's episode. Really like Kalen DeBoer. Obviously, he's been one of the most successful coaches at every step he's ever taken. I'm a big Hoss guy. If you're a big, meaty football coach and your team takes on that identity, you have all my appreciation, love, and respect in the world. So the two guys that stand out the most for that, Mike Elko, Brett Bielema, just two absolute units. And I think that their football teams always take form of that Hoss mentality. And then Kurt Signetti, go Dukes. I was heartbroken when he left for Indiana. And I was mad for like 5 weeks when Indiana was still in the show. That man talks his talk, and he's a damn good football coach. And I respect the success he brought to JMU. I wish he would have kept it, because it's hard to think that JMU wouldn't have been in the college football playoffs last year if we had had that coaching staff and all of Indiana's best players, some of which we'll talk about today, that went to JMU. But he talks his shit. He doesn't care. He's like this old curmudgeon. Yeah, you could get on him for the way that things went against both Ohio State. Was it Ohio State? Why can't I remember where they ended up losing and getting? It was Notre Dame, definitely in the playoffs. There was one other game. Either way, big Kurt Signetti guy, just because he brought me a lot of happiness at JMU. And that's really about it on the coaches. Now, players I do get really excited for, and we'll talk about these guys later, but like DJ Lagway, he's a little banged up right now. Hopefully he can stay healthy for this upcoming season. I am a massive DJ Lagway guy. I'm a firm believer that he is going to be one of the bright future players in this sport over the next couple of years, as long as he can stay healthy. But that's kind of where I lean program-wise, and not even so program. I like to see these coaches do well, because I think they are the best at what they do. And again, I haven't spent this much time talking in a while, so we're going to have the frequent water breaks. I'll try to make it as minimal as possible, but I do want to have a voice to do episode 2. So moving along, more things about me. I've talked about how college football is kind of a newfound love to me. I will not pretend to know the long, great history of this sport. I will also not pretend to know even the somewhat recent history of this sport. I am a sports fan, so for the last 10, 15 years of my life, I know the big storylines in college football. I watch the big games. I watch the championship, the playoffs. I have a general understanding of what has happened in this sport. That being said, I'm learning new things about this sport every day, where coaches had been in previous stops. The background of certain players transferring from place to place, like the connection between certain coaches and players and program rivalries. I'm learning all that stuff on the go. So there will be stuff I say on the show that you're probably listening to and you're like, the fuck is this guy talking about? I will never pretend, and I'll always admit, like, hey, didn't know that. So be patient with me there. I am trying to learn as much about the sport as I can, but it's 134, 136 teams, and I've only been watching like every game possible for the last couple of years. So be patient with me there. I want the sport to be informative, insightful. I also want it to be a little bit silly. I think there's a lot of people out there that take themselves so seriously in this space. And I think the success of a lot of guys recently have been those that are maybe authentic to themselves. I'm a weird guy. I love sports. I love music. I'm one of those weird EDM heads. I go to raves. I do a lot of weird shit in my own personal life. I'm goofy. I'm not going to pretend to just be this football hardo that lives, eats, breathes the sport. I love it. I also love other things in life. So I want my authentic self in this show. I don't want it to just be like I turn on this camera and all of a sudden I'm up here in a suit and tie. That being said, suit and tie, I just have one rule for this show. One rule. And we'll keep it until the end of time. The hat stays on and the sleeves stay off. Pretty simple to explain why. I sweat. I'm already sweating right now. I can feel the bottom of these shirts already a little sweaty. We'd have some really bad pit stains while doing the show on YouTube. And the hat. I got some nice curls. I got some long hair. I wouldn't say it necessarily matches at the top. I got a pretty big forehead. It might be thinning. I don't know. I'm 28. A lot of guys' hair thins by the age of 28. So only rule for this show. You will always see a hat on this head, unless we want to do like a GoFundMe, or you can donate, maybe a super chat for me to go get hair plugs, head over to Turkey. And the sleeves will always be off this shirt because I don't want to be watching back on some clips and doing editing and have to stare at these gross pit stains that I know I have typically when I'm wearing shirts with sleeves. So that's the one rule. Couple more things before we get into the other storylines, the big college football part of the show. I will try to discuss everything about the world of college football, but at the same time, I'm also going to gravitate toward the teams and the conferences that are most important. Shout out to the guys that do a podcast on the G5 teams. Shout out to the ones that are a Georgia Tech podcast. Those are great podcasts and very special. For someone like myself, as you can tell, I grew up at Syracuse, JMU. I live in a city with Vanderbilt. I gravitate toward what matters in the sport, and that sounds really rude to say, but if I'm trying to attract an audience that loves college football and the sport as a whole, they're not going to want an episode where I go over the top G5 contenders in the sport, which we could do, but I want to focus on where the sport is heading, what the sport gravitates to. It's going to be a lot of SEC and Big Ten. And probably more Big 12 than ACC. College football is really heading in this direction where a few conferences matter more than the others. And it does suck for the purity of the sport, but I'm not going to come up here and break down every ACC matchup heading into a Saturday when I know that people want to know what my thoughts are on Ohio State, Texas, or, Georgia, Alabama. I'm going to focus on the stuff that gets the most eyeballs because I also think it's the most captivating part of this sport. Another thing about this show, I will not, how do I want to say it, fight the good fight when it comes to playoff structure, NIL, transfer portal. There are a lot of great big names in the sport. In media for the sport. Josh Pate, Joel Klatt, Danny Cannell, even though he annoys me, Ryan Russillo. A lot of these guys do a lot of work arguing about what's ruining college football. Expanded playoffs are a mess. NIL is a mess. Transfer portal is a mess. I think all of it is a mess. This is episode 1. I don't have any subscribers to these channels. I don't really have a huge following here. So I'm not going to fight any good fight on this show that is then going to turn a lot of heads being like, who had that really great rant about the playoff structure? Springblake. And then anybody that person says that to, they go, who's Springblake? And they'll go, oh, it's this guy I found on TikTok. I'm not going to do those things. So we'll talk about new stuff when it happens, but I'm not going to sit here in my rocking chair telling all the things that I think need to be fixed about college football. That being said, I have thoughts and opinions, and I'll just get them out here first because I think it's important to at least know where I stand on certain things. So obviously I'm a fan of paying players. I think it needs more structure, obviously. I've always been confused why we don't treat players and NIL and contracts like we do with coaches. Why can't we have bonuses or payout structures for achieving a certain number of metrics or team wins or, your attendance at workouts? It should be almost reward-based compensation for these players, just as it is for head coaches. You have your base salary, but if you want to make on top of that, maybe it's an all SEC honors. Or maybe it's, the team gets to the playoffs and you can get that tiered bonus. I think doing so and having contracts and having multi-year agreements will help the universities a lot too, because of, maybe trying, to avoid losing 40 players in offseason to the transfer portal because they've signed multi-year deals. So now they have to stay at least 2, or they have to give some of that money back if they do choose to leave, or the other team has to buy out the first team's contract so they can sign a contract with him. I think there It's the Wild West. Everybody knows it. I'm surprised I don't hear enough conversations about doing it like that and treating them like coaches. Like Kurt Signetti is a great example. Kurt Signetti, when he left JMU, he had to be bought out of his contract. So what did Indiana do? They bought him out of his JMU contract. If next offseason, Arch Manning wants to go to Ohio State, Ohio State should have to pay Texas for his talents. Or there should at least be some easier outs or some compensation back, a way to put more responsibility on the players and also provide more security for the teams themselves. So that's my thoughts on NIL and transfer portal. Real quick on playoff expansion. I am always of the opinion and the interest of creating the highest amount of meaningful games. Right now, we're in talks of moving up to 14, 16 teams. Look, the NCAA is always going to be focused on what makes the most money, the most games. So we're going to go to 16 at some point. The structure of that is so important. Recently I think we've seen the SEC and the Big 12 and maybe a little bit of the ACC come out in support of the 5-11 model, which is you get your 4 Power 4 champions, the best G5, and 11 at-large bids. As opposed to what the Big Ten proposes, and I think there is some backing in some places with these smaller conferences as well too, of the 4-4-2-2-1-3, which is 4 SEC, 4 Big Ten, 2 ACC, 2 Big 12, 1 G5, 3 at large. I lean more with that one because I think it creates the most amount of meaningful games. I think the 5-11 model is scary because I just don't want the committee, the playoff committee that being, having more say on who gets in and who gets out. You're going to leave 11 spots up to the playoff committee. We yelled all last season, and they only had, 7 to pick? Was it? We had a 12-team playoff, and there was 5 automatic bids? Yeah. We got mad about 7. Now you want to give them 4 more to dispute? And then you're going to get into the range of, debating who the best 16th team in the nation is? 16 through 25, you could have 13 teams deserving of that spot. I don't want the committee having a strong grip on the overwhelming majority of teams that get into the playoffs. I lean the 4-4-5-1-2, or the 4-4-2-2-1-3, but I also have my own idea. And I said this on a social clip once. I would like the 4-4-5-1-2 model. And what that is that the Big Ten and the SEC get their 4 teams. There's 5 teams split up between the Big 12 and the ACC. Now, what you get out of that is you get the 2 teams that make the conference title in each conference. So the 2 teams playing for the ACC and Big 12 championship, they're in the playoffs. That 5th spot, you get the 3rd place ACC and the 3rd place Big 12 team. They play each other conference championship weekend, and the winner takes that 5th spot and gets into the playoffs. I think it creates another really meaningful game in that part of the season. You get your 1 G5 and then 2 at-large bids. One can be Notre Dame and one could be one of those other, maybe it's a 5th SEC team or a 5th Big Ten team or whoever it ends up being. Either way, that creates the most meaningful amount of games. The 5-11 is so risky because I get why the SEC is into it, because if they get one guaranteed in, their conference champion, there's going to be an argument that they deserve to get the most amount of teams in their conference, which is why I don't understand the ACC and the Big 12 supporting it, because they don't have the depth or the quality even at the top to combat with the 5th place team in the SEC. So again, we're not really going to discuss these things in the show that much. I just thought for the first episode here to give you guys a good understanding of what we're going to be, what this show is going to look like. That's me, my background in football, my overarching thoughts on the sport, and now we can get into the fun stuff.